All right, I want to welcome everyone to the Parrot Club's meeting tonight in conjunction with Connecticut Parrot Society. We're going to be talking about avian influenza for the parrot owner, and we're very happy to have Dr. Kristin Sinclair, board-certified avian vet at Kensington Bird and Animal Hospital, is going to tell us all about what we should do with this scourge that's progressing across the United States and potentially puts our birds in danger in addition to outdoor birds. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to you, Kristin.
All right, thank you, Amy. So thanks for coming out tonight, everybody, to hear it. So we're going to talk about avian influenza. We're going to kind of go into the basics of the virus, how it affects the various populations. Wildlife, chickens, and parrots are going to be our focus. The main takeaway I'd like everyone to leave with tonight, any of my fellow bibliophiles in the audience recognize this ridiculous green creature in the upper left corner? Anybody? Any hands waving? Okay, so this little goofball comes from a British humor series called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Basically, The Hitchhiker's Guide is a survival and tour guide for the universe. And this guy is a little icon that is featured with the book series. But when you turn on The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, its welcome screen, in according to the author, warm, friendly letters, says, "Don't panic." And that is basically our theme tonight is, no, yes, we should take this seriously. Yes, we should take precautions. Should we panic? No. So with avian influenza, to get into the nerdy bits about it, it's what we call an enveloped virus. So this is a virus that has an outer membrane. The genetic material is inside, and on the outside, it's got a lipid layer, basically little fat molecules to give it protection. Within that outer layer, they have little proteins for attaching to body cells. There's many different types of them. The ones you hear about the most are called hemagglutinin, which we refer to as H, and neuraminidase, which we refer to as N. So when you hear about the avian influenza viruses, or any of the flu viruses, they'll often be referred to as H number, N number. And that's basically referring to what combination of these proteins they have on their surface. So with avian influenza, we typically divide it up into high pathogenicity and low pathogenicity strains. And what that refers to is that in chickens, the high pathogenicity strains tend to cause a lot of mortality, a lot of losses in chickens specifically. And it can affect other species that way as well, though not necessarily. With the low pathogenicity strains, they don't tend to cause a lot of deaths in chickens. They'll make them sick or cause no signs at all. In wild birds, often these come with no signs whatsoever. Traditionally, when you are talking about the high pathogenicity strains, it's usually something that begins with H5 or H7. Not all of those are high path strains, but many of them do. And some of the low pathogenicity strains can mutate to become the high pathogenicity strains. But basically, when you hear about the different numbering systems, this is what they use and this is why they use it. There's approximately, at least 14, 15 different H's and a bunch of N strains. So you can get all sorts of combinations. So with the transmission cycles, many of the avian influenza viruses do circulate naturally in the wild bird population, with waterfowl and raptors being the most commonly, they're the most common carriers in the wild. Many, many, many different strains have been identified, including the high pathogenicity and low pathogenicity strains. If you take a peek in any given avian medical journal, the pathology journals, the wildlife journals, there's at least an article or two or more every issue about the new strain of avian influenzas that's been identified in China or Peru or the US. It's been circulating in the wild population for a very long time. Where we get concerned is when a high pathogenicity isolate comes out and it starts to affect our domestic birds. There can be increased cases during the seasonal migration. For example, the birds that are hanging out in Florida all winter, circulating the virus amongst themselves, as they start to move northward, they bring the virus with them. So you'll see, for example, this time of year, avian influenza making its way up the Atlantic flyway. or it may do so in the Pacific flyway from birds coming up from Mexico and South America. These viruses usually circulate within the wild population, but occasionally you can get crossover to the domestic birds. The most common route of transmission is direct contact, coming face to face with the infected creature, but fecal contamination serves as a major source of infection for a lot of our poultry. Basically, the wild birds poop as they go by, and the chicken comes in contact with that contaminated poop. This could be on their enclosures, this could be in their food source, this could be in their water source. Live markets are also a major place where these crossover events occur. For example, with the SARS virus back in the day, there was a lot of talk about live markets in Asia where, wild birds, chickens, pigs, etc., are all mixing and mingling and sharing their viruses back and forth and passing them along to the people. This happens with the influenza viruses as well. So, kind of a rough sketch of how the viruses typically circulate. We've got our little wild bird here, often waterfowl, but this virus will circulate back and forth in them for quite some time and occasionally will cross over to the poultry. From there, it can circulate in poultry, it can pass to other wild birds from there. In both cases, it can jump over to the human population, either directly from those wild birds or from the infected poultry. There are reports in other mammals of occasional virus outbreaks in them. Usually they've managed to pick it up from a wild bird and not necessarily another mammal. And every so often, come on, there we go, we get another intermediate, such as swine. With the swine flu, there's been some strains where it came from the wild birds to the poultry, to the swine, to the human, or it may go directly from the wild bird to the pig, to the human. Most transmission, though, occurs direct bird-to-bird contact. You put two sick birds together, or two birds together. If one's sick, the other one ends up sick eventually. It generally is close contact. Airborne secretions are a concern. So if that sick bird sneezes, its nasal discharge gets shaken around when they shake their head, that can serve as a route of transmission. These particular particles don't travel very far. So if you have an infected chicken on your farm and your neighbor half-mile away has chickens, you're not necessarily going to get airborne transmission over that kind of distance. You may get it through other means, but not from airborne particles. Fecal material also serves as a common contact for virus transmission, coming in contact with the poop of an infected bird. Indirect contact can also be a major source of transmission, and this is with basically it's contaminated equipment, cleaning tools, housing, etc. So say I scrub my chicken coop and I use the same scrub brush on my parrot's cage, I could bring the virus in that way. People have transmitted things by wearing a pair of rubber boots to one chicken farm, failing to sanitize them, and then wear those same unclean boots to the next farm. Even farm trucks, if that farm truck starts at one infected barn and moves to the next, the virus travels along with it. Even contaminated food. If your neighbor lends you some chicken food because you're running low and don't have time to get to the store, if they have contamination from infected chickens, that chicken feed could bring the virus into your flock. So most of the work done with studying avian influenza in birds has happened in poultry because, well, they're economically important to us, so we tend to throw a lot of money at their research. We also tend to see the most cases that affect us in poultry. In the chickens, you will see respiratory signs, as you might expect with influenza. So a lot of discharge, sneezing, coughing. There'll be open mouth breathing and gasping for air. You can get diarrhea, much like you get in humans with influenza. Sometimes there'll be some swelling of the head, the neck, the area around the eyes, and their sinuses. There have been reports of some odd purplish skin discoloration along the legs and the neck. Neurologic signs have also been reported, such as torticollis, or in the lay term, wry neck. This poor little chicken on the bottom right is showing what we refer to as wry neck, where their head is basically just kind of twisted in a weird direction. Some of them will throw it over their back, some will tuck it in almost upside down under their chest. It can look very different between chickens. You may see them having tremors that almost look like seizures. They can be paralyzed, especially the wings. And of course, death being a major endpoint for a lot of birds, especially with the highly pathogenic strains. So the outcome and impact of this virus depends on which population you're talking about. With wild birds, they can carry avian influenza virus without any signs that we can detect. Um, Sometimes they will fall ill from it, but for the most part, a lot of poultry or waterfowl will carry it without symptoms. However, if that virus they carry mutates into one of the highly pathogenic strains, it may prove lethal to them. With poultry, if there is a detection, the most common thing that's going to happen is that the entire flock is culled. And by culling, we mean euthanasia. Um, it's a major concern for the poultry industry, not only from the immediate economic losses of birds that are either dying or they are culled because the flock is infected. It also means export bans. No country wants to take in birds from another nation where the avian influenza virus is running rampant. So if we had a major outbreak that was affecting our poultry farms, odds are we would not be able to ship chicken to China for processing as we currently do. It also can be reflected in decreased egg production. If this hits an egg layer barn, not only do you lose the birds, but all the eggs they would be producing are now gone. So it's a double hit for the egg producers. With parrots and other birds, we're going to get into that shortly. So for control, right now, there's not a commercially available avian influenza vaccine. Often with dangerous viruses like this, where we need to keep track of them, often there's not an approved vaccine for use specifically because we want to be able to track the movement of this virus. If we started wholesale vaccinating chicken barns, we wouldn't necessarily know if there's any avian influenza in the area if we don't, for example, catch the right wild bird to know that it's present. Um, for example, to shift gears to the mammal side, the rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus has been making its way across the US in the past few years. And for the longest time, we could not vaccinate unless there was an active outbreak going on to protect the nearby rabbits, because the USDA wanted to keep track of this virus as it popped up. Now that it's showing up more frequently and spreading across the US, they are now allowing us to vaccinate rabbits preventatively rather than waiting for the outbreak to occur. With influenza, I'm not sure I see this happening anytime soon. Right now, our best prevention is what we call biosecurity, basically preventing that infection from happening in the first place if we can. This means we avoid the exposure, we keep the infected birds away, we keep everything clean, we remove the contamination. So if we do see, there's evidence that wild birds are pooping, we prevent that, we clean it up, we sanitize. If there's infected individuals, we get them away from the rest of the flock as quickly as possible. So for parrots, which of course the reason we're all here tonight, what do we've got to worry about our parrots? Our little green guy is back in the upper right hand corner. And that's because so far, knock on wood, case reports are rare in parrots. I did a literature search this weekend and found exactly one report. And it was in a little baby red lord Amazon parrot that was infected with the H5N2 strain. There were a few other mentions of parrot and parakeet strains, but these were mostly research papers looking into genetic sequencing of the viruses, but not necessarily an outbreak situation. A lot of these were overseas papers that I either could not get my hands on or could not read. So I'm not sure if there was a case report or an individual case from which these were isolated, or if it was just routine testing that picked them up. Overall, the transmission risk for most of our pet parrots is low. For much of the year, our parrots in New England are kept inside because the weather outside is terrible. They don't tend to come face to face with infected wild birds or chickens. And most tend to buy our parrots from reputable stores or breeders that practice biosecurity and don't tend to allow chickens and other things near their birds. Where the biggest risks come from is contamination, not necessarily face-to-face contact, but those contaminated items. One area where potential direct exposure can happen is live markets. The flea markets, the outdoor markets where you can buy practically everything from a new set of pots and pans to a chicken or a baby parrot. In these situations, we don't know where the birds came from. We don't know what other creatures they've been in contact with. We don't know what kind of sanitation these people are practicing. They're just willing to sell you a baby parrot for $50. Who wants it? As far as the rest of us, things like footwear that we wear in the yard, for example, while gardening. If we happen to step where that duck pooped, we could bring the virus inside with us on our soiled shoes. If we have a backyard chicken flock, anything we use with those or handling those guys does introduce the risk of us bringing virus inside with us. If there's any hunters, your hunting equipment could be affected, especially if you're hunting waterfowl or even outdoor activity equipment. I'm an avid hiker myself. If my hiking boots go through some duck poop while I'm out and about, I could potentially bring it to work with me if I wear my boots. So with parrots, so far we only have the one case report in that Amazon chick to talk about. And what they saw in this bird really doesn't fit with what we typically see in wildlife or in chickens. This little bird was brought in because its little clutch mate had actually died the day before. This little bird came in the next morning. He was lethargic, just quiet on the bottom of the cage and fluffed. The veterinarians that examined it sought evidence that it had been regurgitating, and they detected blood in its feces, but no discharge, no sneezing or coughing, no respiratory distress, no diarrhea, just the typical non-specific sick bird signs of fluffy and lethargic. Now, this particular bird, they did isolate it to an H5 strain, which is one of the highly pathogenic strains. However, they were given the clearance to actually treat this bird, and this bird survived, thank goodness, and went on, as far as we know, to live a happy bird life. Now, this is highly dictated by what the local USDA officers allow us to do, and not the individual veterinarian. This bird was brought to a teaching hospital in California, a university hospital. They were in contact with the USDA. They were given permission to treat the bird. The USDA officers could have just as easily told the teaching hospital to euthanize that bird for safety's sake. And that could happen with any potential avian case, whether it be a pet parrot or backyard chicken. In this case, though, they were allowed to do the treatment, but that bird spent, I believe, a month in quarantine at the veterinary hospital before they were cleared to release it to go back to the owners. So as far as prevention from our parrots, the biggest thing we can do is just simply keep them indoors. If there is no exposure to wild birds or their waste products, the risk is pretty minimal. If you do insist on bringing your bird outside, which, hey, I get it, it's warm weather, who wouldn't want to bring their bird outside? Keep the bird in covered enclosures, either a covered porch, a tarp thrown over the cage. This picture, we've got an aviary with a built-in solid roof to it. You can't poop through a solid roof. We want to bird-proof that enclosure. The role of songbirds is not quite understood yet, so it's best to keep an enclosure where things like a sparrow could not fly into that enclosure by squeezing through the bars. This particular aviary right here in the picture, you could probably beef up security simply by wrapping a layer of a window screening or mosquito netting around the outside. That way, wild birds can't fit through the bars and the parrot can still climb if they choose. The enclosure will need to be sanitized fairly frequently. So scrub down perches and such for cleanliness, clean up poop. We'll go into sanitizers in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides. We want to avoid contact with higher risk species. Now, while many of us don't necessarily have parrots and chickens in one household, or chickens wandering the house, I mean, there are people out there that do have indoor ducks and indoor chickens that wear delightful little outfits around the house to keep them from pooping everywhere. If you have that in the same house as your parrot, you might want to reconsider that. Leave your outdoor things outside. So if I have that pair of shoes I wear while working in the yard, it stays at the door, it goes in the basement, it stays in the mudroom, it does not enter the parrot space. If my gardening implements must be put away, I put them in the garage and I don't bring them in the house. If I have no choice but to bring it indoors, clean it and sanitize it before you bring it in to minimize that risk. So as far as how to sanitize for influenza, this is where that structure we talked about on the very first slide comes in handy. We had that lipid outer membrane, lipids, fats and oils. Fats and oils, how do we get rid of those? Detergent. So detergents actually do quite a bit to get rid of influenza viruses because they literally break up that membrane. That's why your doctor harps on you every flu season, wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands, because detergents can break up quite a bit of things. And thankfully, a lot of common disinfectants do have efficacy against influenza viruses, avian and otherwise. We don't have to go crazy here. I've had clients with chickens email me links to various commercial grade disinfectants, asking me if I thought this would be okay to use on their coop or their outdoor enclosure. What about this one? And they're like these ridiculous 8-step things where you have to mix this with this reagent, add this powder, mix carefully in a well-ventilated space and use it within an X window. For the most part, this is overkill for the average backyard chicken owner, or even the, most of us the parrot owners. We don't really need those crazy, really intensive high commercial grade disinfectants. Now, if you had a commercial poultry operation, absolutely invest in those. But for the most part, that's a lot of work for something that we don't really need. You have to consider the ease of using and mixing these things. If your disinfectant takes 18 steps to safely prepare it, how many of us really want to go through all that extra effort? How many of us are going to follow all 18 steps to the letter every single time we mix it? I certainly would skip a step. I admit being lazy sometimes. We have to consider the toxicity risk as well. When it tells you to mix it in a well-ventilated area, they mean it. As we all know from things like Teflon and scented candles, our birds are very sensitive to respiratory irritants and toxins. What is safe for the human to be around is not always safe for the bird. There are examples, there's a case report out there of a parrot aviary where the people didn't dilute the bleach enough before scrubbing down the aviary, ordinary household bleach. And they didn't rinse, they didn't air it out enough, they put the birds back in, and guess what? Most of the birds died from basically bleach exposure. I've had supposedly safe cleaning products used by professionals in people's households, and as soon as they brought the parrots home from the carpet cleaning, the parrots died within minutes, even though it was quote unquote safe to bring the pets back in. Washing whatever you can in warm soapy water will do a lot to help get rid of this virus. For some things like fabrics, that's plenty. Again, we just need the detergent action to break up that outer membrane of the virus. Also, sanitizers work better if there's not a lot of organic debris in the way. For example, my dirty hiking boots. I can spray bleach on them all I want, but the bleach can't get through the mud. I have to rinse off the mud, scrub them off, and then the clean surface is much easier to sanitize thoroughly. So there we go. So I went looking online. This is from the USDA's own website of approved sanitizers for avian influenza virus specifically. And just scrolling through the list, we have such familiar names as, oh, look, Lysol, good old Lysol, disinfectant, multi-purpose cleaner. So yeah, that we easily find at the grocery store. And then next up, good old Clorox bleach, sodium hypochlorite. Used correctly, Clorox bleach is fine to use. And then there's Odoban, which you can find it on websites like chewy.com and Amazon. It's a common disinfecting agent used in, say, kennels for mopping and scrubbing down things, but it's fine against avian influenza. And then there's Microban, which you can pick up as a spray, aerosol spray, or a squirt spray in the grocery store. That likewise works just fine against avian influenza. So right there, without going into the crazy commercial disinfectants or anything wild, there's 4 common brands that you can find at the store or online really easily, and they're very easy to use. So safety is important with your disinfectants. You always, always, always follow the instructions on the label. They will tell you exactly how to mix it for safe sanitization purposes. With things like bleach, there are different ways you can mix it. Generally, I will tell people for basic cleaning purposes, like a cupful in a gallon of water will do just fine. Contact time is important. If you just spray it on and wipe it off, well, it didn't have much time to do anything for you. So generally, the label will tell you, spray it, let it set for X number of minutes, then wipe it down or rinse it off. Proper ventilation is important. If it's a respiratory irritant to you, it will be to your bird. So make sure that windows are open, don't spray it too heavily, use it correctly. Often it's a good idea to give it extra time to dry for safety with your parrots. If you can't smell it and you haven't been able to smell it for a good half an hour or so, you are probably okay. Most important, please, please, please do not mix your disinfectants. More is not better. So if you want to use bleach and then Lysol, please be careful with that. I can tell you from personal experience that scrubbing your rat cage with Lysol wipes and then getting annoyed and scrubbing it with bleach because that one spot won't come up, bad idea. Don't do that. um, Especially if it's bleach and anything that says ammonium on the label. That can be a lethal combination. It literally releases chlorine gas, which could kill you. If you must use two different disinfectants, rinse super, super well in between disinfectants. If you think you've rinsed enough, rinse a little bit more, and then let it dry thoroughly before you even think about putting on the second disinfectant. So with poultry, specifically in influenza, of all the domestic species, these guys are at the greatest risk. We kind of covered a bit already what to expect out of these guys. With poultry, chickens are definitely the first thing we think about, but this also includes your turkeys, your quail, and a lot of the commercially kept species. Ducks and geese, likewise, are also potentially affected. Um, with these guys, good biosecurity practices are important for preventing illness. Even for the backyard flock, you should still follow the same protocols or similar as a commercial poultry house would. Both commercial and poultry flocks alike are at risk from this virus, and both may be culled if infection is detected. Um, you hear a lot on the news from previous poultry avian influenza outbreaks in poultry houses in the Midwest, where literally thousands upon thousands of birds were mass euthanized because of this. But even in as recent as last month in New Hampshire, there was a sanctuary situation where this was a small chicken and waterfowl sanctuary for domestic birds, and they had to euthanize the entire group because the virus was detected. Unfortunately, even these birds, which were pampered pets and not commercial producers, still had to be sacrificed because of the detection. It's terrible, but this is what we must do for control. So the USDA does have some really good information on their website for poultry's biosecurity. The left is one of their older guide pamphlets that they produce. It covered basic biosecurity. Their new improved rebranding of it is the Defend the Flock program. A lot of the advertising for the Defend the Flock program applies to avian influenza, but a lot of the things they suggest for that cover just many of the other potential infectious diseases that will affect your poultry. So with that, the first thing they suggest is limiting visitors. So if you have backyard poultry, if you have parrots and your friend has chickens or birds of the you want to limit how many people are visiting your birds, especially those that are coming from situations where they have birds of their own. And that goes into the indirect exposure through dirty shoes or something on your clothing. It's recommended to wash your hands very well before and after handling that chicken. Before, to avoid any contamination on yourself being brought to that bird, and after, if that bird is sick, you're not taking their germs and handing it to another bird. With poultry, this is where they suggest things like boot covers and foot baths to prevent your shoes from carrying things around. Boot covers are typically these plastic silly sleeves that slip over your boots and are discarded when you're done. Foot baths include many of the basic sanitizers. You step into it and then you step out. Using the foot baths, it is important to have clean shoes before going in. Some setups will have a dirty bath where you step in that sanitizer first, use a scrub brush with a long handle to scrub your boots off carefully. And then once they're relatively clean, then you step into the cleaner foot bath for proper sanitization. It's recommended to change clothing before entering and leaving the poultry house. So this would be, for example, for the commercial poultry houses, they often have these little white biohazard looking outfits they put on, and then they take it off before they leave the poultry house. Me as a veterinarian, if I did house calls, I would have a special set of coveralls that I would put on before going in that poultry house. When I leave it, I would take it off, chuck it in a bag, toss it in the back of my truck, and it goes directly to the laundry. Clean and disinfect all tools and equipment that are used with your chickens, which Now, seems like an obvious thing to do, but again, we're humans, we get lazy and we don't want to clean things immediately. But it is important to keep everything from scrub brushes to food bowls, food scoops, you name it, clean and sanitary. Watch your flock for signs of illness. If anybody looks off, whether they are fluffing and sad, whether they are sneezing a lot, you want to watch for those. And in this current climate, if you see any birds in your flock that are sick, report them ASAP to your local veterinarian or to your state agricultural extension folks. So this is the USDA's Defend the Flock Resource Center, but they have a lot of information as far as specifics about biosecurity, which I just listed off to you, some signs of illnesses to look out for. They've got websites for, who do I contact if I have a problem with my flock? And a lot of specifics, especially about avian influenza virus, as well as some of the other common poultry viruses. So for the backyard flock, a lot of what I just listed is most appropriate with a large commercial flock. But even with the backyard flock, you still want to keep your birds away from other flocks. Don't chicken sit your neighbor's chickens in your coop. Maybe have someone else chicken sit for them. Don't be going to visit your neighbor's chickens every day and then coming back to your own birds. Any vehicles that are going from chicken place to chicken place to get sanitized and cleaned. The USDA often recommends taking your farm truck or your veterinary truck and literally driving it to the nearest car wash and hosing it down there before you go anywhere else. Transport cages, even a carrier, should be sanitized in between use. We don't want to share supplies with the neighbors. The parrots and the chickens, you have a scrub brush for the eclectus, you have a scrub brush for the chickens, and you don't mix and match the two. You have separate food bowls. This is the chicken bowl, this is the parrot bowl, and we don't mix and match them. We don't borrow feed from the neighbors if we're running low. We don't lend them our rake that we use to clean up in the chicken coop. And likewise, it's probably not a good idea right now to, even take the scrub brush from your parrot and use it between another room full of parrots, or, hey, my friend is they lost their bird food bowl. Here, use mine instead. Probably best to just tell them, go get your own new bowl. And likewise, monitoring, reporting. Sick bird, whether it be your backyard chicken or your parrot, of course, give us a call or give the state vet's office a call if it's your chicken. With humans, where we tend to come in contact with this is through exposure to infected birds. Poultry farm workers are a particular risk because they're working with a large volume of birds. And if they are sick, these guys are literally who's in the face of that sick chicken. Live markets, as we mentioned, are a common place of exposure for humans. Backyard flocks, our own chickens that live in our backyard, and hunters are also at particular risk. Waterfowl hunters, they will, when they pick up that dead bird, they do not know if it was already sick before they shot it. So they do have a risk of their own. Food risk, say, you eat that influenza infected chicken, is pretty low. Most of those birds are going to look like death, and they will die or be culled well before they reach the slaughterhouse. Most reputable slaughterhouses are doing on-site testing for various viruses. Many of them are patrolled by actual USDA officers who are inspecting the carcasses, testing birds at random to make sure that nothing is slipping through the cracks. And we're cooking it, we're heating it to high temperatures, so the odds of exposure through your chicken dinner are pretty low. In humans, the symptoms, well, it's influenza, it's flu-like, and if you notice anything, of course, contact your physician. So with wild birds, the most commonly affected birds have traditionally been waterfowl and raptors. Occasionally, other species such as shorebirds have been affected. Even just in the past few months, certain types of shorebirds in Massachusetts, specifically Cape Cod, have had detections. With the wild birds, the main risk of humans is handling the dead or sick birds. Again, hunters. Hikers and outdoor enthusiasts, I would not be able to resist the temptation if I saw that bird on the ground looking sickly to scoop it up and assess it. And that's potentially how I could be exposed. Wildlife rehabilitators right now are in a very unique position of exposure. They take in sick and injured birds of all types, and they don't necessarily know, looking at it, if this bird has avian influenza or a different respiratory infection. Then they may not know until they open up the box from whoever found the bird and pick up it and realize, oh God, this looks like flu. Wildlife sanctuaries, likewise, are the folks that work there are also at risk because they are literally working with wild birds. Even though they're housed in pens, unless there's perfect biosecurity, those birds are at risk. For the most part, zoos, those are technically wild birds in there, they just live in cages. For the most part, zoos do follow pretty strict biosecurity protocols. A lot of their more sensitive species, precious species, endangered species tend to be kept in some pretty secure enclosures. Where the potential exposure would come is the ones that have the free flight aviaries, where the birds can come and go as they please. Those are not always completely covered, so potentially those birds are at risk of exposure from wild birds. Oh, okay. So this comes off of the USDA website. They have on their website a list of all of the detections of avian influenza within a certain date range. And this is just, I popped on there last week to take a look and see what has been most recently found. But so far we're finding, simply within the window from the 21st of March through the 18th of March here, this is just a snippet of what they found in a 3-day period. But we see Tennessee, we see Florida represented, Iowa, Missouri, South Dakota, and everything ranging from a green-winged teal, which is a little duck-looking thing, black vultures, snow geese, mergansers are another waterfowl, Canada goose. You'd think those guys would be too ornery to be affected, but nope. Black vultures, likewise. And then, come on. Here's the 2 most recent isolations in Connecticut, both of them down in New London County earlier in March. Both of them were American black duck. Now, these were detected by basically a live capture where they catch the birds purely for surveillance purposes, and then they test. Let me see if I can go back. Some of these were hunter harvest. In many states, the various fish and game authorities will encourage hunters, especially waterfowl hunters, to bring their catches for testing. It's a voluntary program, and it's basically for surveillance purposes. A lot of hunters are actually rather interested in conservation because without conservation, they would have nothing to hunt. So many of them will happily present the birds that they have caught for testing purposes to make sure that basically the birds that they're hunting are safe to consume, and also that there's not help to detect if there's a problem in the population they're going after. Some are wild bird mortalities. For example, Brevard, Florida has a zoo, and they found these 3 dead black vultures lying around. Agency harvest means that the USDA themselves went out and were catching birds for testing. Here's some more a bunch more wild bird mortalities, a lot of them geese and vultures. Okay. So again, during migration, you can see an uptick in cases as the birds move southward or northward. Currently, the role of songbirds is unknown. As I scrolled through that USDA database the other day, practically everything I saw was, goose, goose, owl, vulture, goose, goose, those little shorebirds in Cape Cod. So far, there have been, knock on wood, no reports this year, at least, in songbirds. Does this mean they are not susceptible to it? It's unclear. So far, there haven't been any die-offs associated with it that we're aware of. However, it may just be that we're not sampling these guys enough and not that they're not affected. Right now, a lot of the USDA and state agency surveillance efforts are focused on waterfowl because they are a major reservoir for avian influenza viruses. And many state agencies are also reliant on hunter harvest and dead birds presented for testing. It could be that the virus is actually circulating in sparrows when we just don't know yet because we haven't conducted extensive testing of sparrows. Right now, because we don't know the risk and we haven't really seen any major outbreaks in songbirds, so far the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection has not yet recommended taking down bird feeders since it doesn't seem like songbirds are a major risk. All the same, it's still a good idea to practice good hygiene and biosecurity practices around your bird feeders, and especially if you have parrots. So if you have, for example, outdoor poultry in your yard, you might want to consider taking down your feeders. not just so that those little monsters aren't bringing disease to your chickens all by themselves. Outdoor feeders attract little birds that also attract hawks and owls and things that want to eat those little birds. And so the raptors have been identified as potential source of avian influenza. So if you have a lot of backyard birds, you might want to consider taking those down so that the hawks aren't visiting your yard too. Washing and sanitizing your bird feeders and bird baths regularly is a must. You should be doing this anyway, even if it's not a major avian influenza outbreak year, but especially now, every week, take them down, break them down, and scrub them, sanitize them, rinse them, and put them back. Be sure to do all this outdoors, especially if you have a parrot in the house. We don't want that contaminated feeder to potentially be a source if, heaven forbid, a hawk pooped on it on the way by. If you find a dead bird in your yard, it is always recommended, influenza or not, to take down your feeders and dispose of the bird properly. Generally, they'll suggest either burying it or double bagging it and putting it in the garbage can. The Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection does have a website for reporting bird deaths, where you can go online, you fill out a little form and say, hey, I found this dead goldfinch by my feeder. This was the day, this is what he looked like, and submit it, and they'll take note of it. Right now, they are not investigating isolated bird deaths. If you find one dead goldfinch in your yard, you're not going to get a call from DEP. They're not going to come ask for it to do a necropsy on it. Right now, their focus is on multiple bird deaths. So if you say find 5 dead goldfinches instead of just one, then they may take a closer look at your yard and the birds. So for those of us in Connecticut, this is the Department of the DEP's website, and this is it's a CFW wild bird mortality reporting.ct.gov. Quite a mouthful, but they do have a little link here to click to get to a form you fill out if you find dead birds in your yard. They also include a phone number to call. For those in Connecticut, our state agricultural and wildlife folks do have a lot of good resources online for us. They have this link right here to tell you all about current expectations and findings in wildlife for avian influenza and concerns. The Department of Agriculture covers things from the poultry aspect. The first link is for the state veterinarian's office, who you would call if you have a sick bird, sick chicken specifically. Right now, several veterinary hospitals are either not seeing chickens and turkeys if they are suspicious for avian influenza. Others are restricting those appointments to the end of the day. But if there's any concern, many of us are directing people to simply just call the state veterinarian's office rather than bring them into the veterinary office. From there, the state veterinarian will dispatch a team to come check out your bird. They'll do the testing, investigation, and handle things from there. And then this website here is just a lot of state-specific avian influenza general information. This last one is the actual federal USDA website providing information on avian influenza should you want to read about it a little bit more. And that's what I got for you.
I have a question for you if you're taking questions.
Absolutely.
So I have a big screened in porch and a Pioneer parrot.
Okay.
And every day in the summer, I'm in Vermont, but in the summer she goes out onto this porch,
Yeah.
and I do let her go loose. But my concern is I do have a lot of birds in the yard, and every once in a while, a bird may fly by and leave some poop on the screen. It's not often, but it has happened. What should my concern be if a bird poops on the screen?
Yeah, the concern would be if your Pioneer then goes and contacts that area of the screen, especially if you've not had a chance to clean and sanitize that yet.
Okay.
Sometimes a double barrier method may help you where, while it's nice to let the Pioneer free fly on the screen and porch, potentially a big old cage inside the screen and porch. So we still get to enjoy the outdoors, but we've got that level of double barrier in between us.
Yeah. Okay.
Or even put out a layer of netting around the porch for that extra barrier.
Okay. But if I was just going to say, if I clean it up quickly,
Yeah.
That-
Yeah.
Is that good prevention?
Yeah, and the days that you're going to let your pie out on the porch, go out there, give it a close inspection. If you
Yep.
see anything soiled, scrub it right then, hit it with some
Okay,
Lysol spray, let it dry before the bird goes out.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question,
Yes.
actually two.
Mhm.
The first one is it safe to take eggs from your neighbor's hens?
So far, there's not been major demonstrated risk from eggs because they don't, they're not breathing, they don't have discharges or anything to infect you. The risk is considered relatively low at this point. All the same, of course, proper safe food handling, cook your eggs thoroughly before eating them, but that should be fine.
And my other question was, you mentioned that songbirds right now, nothing's been found in the songbirds. I feed the doves outside, ground feeders at the end of my driveway every day. Is that safe to do?
As far as we know so far, in addition to the songbirds, there's not been much mention in any of the what they call the columbiform birds, your pigeons and your doves. What I have here on my screen is the most recent data from the USDA on their wild bird detections. This is where I took my screenshots earlier. But as of the last update on April 6th, we've got bald eagles, mallards, snowy owls, more owls, another bald eagle. But so far, yeah, there hasn't been any mention thus far of songbirds, pigeons, or the like so far. So that should be okay. Again,
Okay.
I have to interject here just briefly though. Nova Scotia did surveil songbirds and they did find it in a blue jay. So that's one of my biggest concerns is how do we know what we don't know? If we don't surveil songbirds, we won't know if they have it. Obviously, if you see a mass die-off, that's big news, but we're not seeing mass die-offs of waterfowl, and yet we know a lot of them have it.
right.
And one of our local rehabbers had taken a raven that died, and she sent it for necropsy, and it was positive also. So that's the problem. We really don't know how many songbirds actually have it because we're not testing them.
Exactly. And even this, it looks like a massive outbreak in snow geese, but all these birds were all hunter harvested. So these were theoretically healthy looking birds that the only reason we know they were carrying it is because somebody shot them and presented them for testing.
Exactly. Do you want to turn off screen sharing, by the way, Kristin?
Yeah, I just left it intentionally for a moment to show off that little listing there.
Okay, great. All right, we'll take more questions. I see a lot of people have their hands up.
I have a question.
Yes.
So with my outdoor aviaries, I wanted to purchase the bird netting, so to create a extra barrier.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's all sold out unless you literally buy the huge $4,000 worth. So what we thought we would do is take 2x6s and create a 6-inch barrier with either hardware cloth or the tight chicken wire on all of the aviaries. And then we're going to roof everything and have an extended roof.
Yeah.
So it would be 6 inches from wire to wire.
Okay. And you may even, if you use chicken wire, use 2 layers and overlap them a bit so there's not any gaps. We just don't want songbirds to get in there, and things as small as a finch can get through standard chicken wire.
Okay, then I'll just use hardware cloth because they cannot get through that.
Yeah, or window screening by the roll would work as well.
Okay, I'll have to look into the price of that. I don't feel like this is going to go away, so I thought better to build something that I don't have to redo every year. We have pretty bad winters here in Michigan, so
with leaving influenza and such out of the picture, having that double barrier is even helpful for protecting against raccoons and other terrible things.
Yeah, I have livestock guardian dogs, so thankfully that's something I don't have to worry about. But thank you. You just backed up what my vets told me when I was there yesterday. So I really appreciated you taking the time to do this.
Oh, my pleasure.
Donna, you want to go next?
Yep. I have 2 questions for you.
Yes.
I'm one of those people that has the chickens indoors, the parrot. I have 2. One's a special needs. They get carried outside. Their enclosure is like nobody can get in it. We
Yeah.
disinfect everything, but we got a puppy.
Ah,
And I have foot covers, but the puppy is a vector. So my one question is about what can I do about the puppy?
yeah.
The second question has to do with, I've done a lot of reading up about just general, when will we know when it's all clear, at least for this season? So 2 questions. What do you
Yes.
recommend for puppies?
Yeah, the puppy's the challenge, sort of washing him every time he comes in. Some people with dogs with, say, allergies will keep a set of baby wipes or the like by the door so they can wipe down their feet as soon as they come in. And that may not be a bad idea to at least clean the parts of the puppy that are most likely to contact the ground where the poop is. I mean, puppies are going to puppy, they're going to chew on things, eat outdoors, and roll on things. And there's only so much we can do to sanitize the entire dog.
So that we are doing that. So I got hypoallergenic wipes for him, and he's target trained, well, mostly to sit on the mat and
Yeah.
allow us to clean his feet. And if his little butt falls on the ground or he rolls, we just give him a quick wipe off. But by the way, it does prevent dirt from being in the house. Yeah, huge. And the second question, which I've been asked a lot, is when will we get it? How will we know it will be safe this season? We know it's a heat killed,
Right.
heat kills it. So
Yeah, I think part of it will be on the state level, watching the exposure and testing reports to see as they start to peter out and become less frequent. I don't know that we'll ever be, completely out of the woods, because this virus circulates in the wild populations. It has for years, and that next mutation could happen at any point. So I think it's well worthwhile in general just to keep up those basic biosecurity protocols for the long haul. But yes, as we get into the warmer weather, as the birds stop migrating for the year, we should hopefully see a downtick in cases until they migrate again.
it just would be nice, especially with the two chickens that I have. One's
Yeah.
a crossbeak, can't eat on her own. The other one is a companion.
Yeah.
So they spend their days, and long and short of it is, I just would like for them to get some natural sunshine once in a while, maybe once this year.
Mhm.
So I was curious about that. And I get asked that question a lot too. So thank you for your most excellent presentation.
My pleasure. I mean, as long as
Okay.
the outdoor area for the chickens is reasonably, not quite Fort Knox, but reasonably locked down and kept sanitary the best you can, then the risk is minimal. Can we ever completely eliminate it? Oh, no. But as long as you're taking measures to minimize it, I don't see why the chickens couldn't, go out for some sunshine as long as they're covered and protected.
Thank you.
We're going to take a couple questions from chat.
Yep.
But before we do, I just want to mention the thing about the heat. I can hear that a lot. Of course, we heard that with COVID as well. But just remember, H5N1 first made a splash when it presented in Southeast Asia, where it's a lot hotter year round than it is here. So there's no reason to presume that heat will do anything about it.
Yeah.
And the other comment I want to make is we're very fortunate. When I first heard H5N1 was here, I was like, oh my God, because when it presented in Southeast Asia in the 90s and then again the 2000s, it was transmissible to humans and had a 53% mortality rate. In other words, more than half the people exposed to it actually died. So it was a horrendous thing. Unfortunately, the events that happened there, it did tend to just die out. So we didn't have mass deaths. We had close to 1,000 human deaths. But when I heard H5N1 was here, I thought, great, are we going to be having half the people exposed to the birds die here? Fortunately, this particular H5N1 is not particularly dangerous to humans, but it would take very little for it to mutate to become similar to the one that was in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
If that occurs, we're talking mass die-offs of humans. So this is something that we do have to monitor very closely, because as we know, viruses mutate. They mutate to serve their own purposes. So this is something that's always in the back of my mind with this. So
I was pretty shocked when I was studying for my specialty boards, and even just downloading articles to keep up my collection afterwards, just how many of the wildlife journals and avian disease journals mention, constantly, H5N1, H5N2 strains just I'm reading these thinking, holy cow, how are we not all dead yet? No, there's been various strains of them that have been circulating quietly for years and so far not making their crossover event. It's pretty wild how many of these scary viruses are out there. And as you said, Amy, one mutation away from crossing
Right.
over.
And am I wrong in thinking that this is the worst H5N1 outbreak we've had in the United States ever? That we know of?
Years ago, where they had US and Canada, where a good several million chickens through the central part of the country had to be culled to control it. I think a couple turkey farms and chicken farms were wiped out.
Yeah, but we've already killed over 23 million
Yeah.
as of, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So,
Yeah.
and this outbreak is increasing. I mean, a few weeks ago, it was in 14 states. It's in 32 now. So that tells me this is an extremely virulent strain, at least in terms of birds. And I don't recall ever seeing an avian influenza outbreak in the United States nearly as bad as this.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact death count from the last one. I'd have to do some digging on that. But yeah, there's at least definitely a lot more media about it. That is for sure.
Okay. All right, let's go to the chat. I have a couple of questions there. Teresa writes, I have a neighbor with a dirty, unkept chicken coop, unregistered coop. Property is only separated some 30 feet from an outdoor aviary I have. Is it okay to put my birds outside?
Yeah, at 30 feet, you are probably okay space-wise, but it probably wouldn't hurt to cover that side of your coop or your aviary with a tarp. So at least the big risk would be those aerosolized particles like sneezing and dust from the ground where these guys have been pooping. Those would probably be your biggest risks. Having that extra barrier between your aviary and that coop will probably be helpful.
All right. Yeah, that sounds a little dangerous. But Chantel asks, what kinds of testing is being done to confirm this contamination virus flu?
Typically, there's most of the swab tests where they collect swabs from the mouth and nose of a bird and often the cloaca as well. This is highly controlled at the state level. Most of the testing is being done by state agencies. Or if we are collecting, we have to send them to certain laboratories. From my part, there are certain places where we will export birds to Puerto Rico and certain European countries where they have to be tested for influenza first. And I cannot send those tests to any old laboratory. It must go to the national lab in Iowa for testing. But for the most part, a lot of the testing is being done on the state level by state agencies. It's not the sort of thing where it's, I mean, I can do testing for it and submit it, but right now they're mostly focusing on domestic surveillance and export at that particular laboratory. If we were testing with the concern of an outbreak, if you were truly worried that your bird was infected, I would be obligated to turn it over to the state veterinarian's office for testing.
How long does it take testing to come back?
Typically from the national lab, usually it's been a couple of days. Those with the pandemic, they've been very short-handed and it has been taking upwards of 10 to 14 days to get results. I imagine at the state level, I think the most recent client we referred to the state vet's office, it was back within a day or three.
I could very well see somebody who has a little chicken farm in the backyard or just birds in general being afraid to submit to testing, because Absolutely. If you submit and these are your pets and you submit and someone's positive, they're going to come kill all your birds.
Yeah, and that was a concern with that sanctuary in New Hampshire that was affected, is that they were worried that, now all the neighboring chicken farms and backyard keepers are not going to report their sick birds because they don't want everyone getting culled, which I get it. I would not want to lose my birds either, but unfortunately it also makes it puts everybody around them at risk, including, not that New Hampshire has a lot of commercial producers, but they're there.
I mean, what would happen if you had let's say you had some chickens and some parrots, and your chickens are housed outdoors and there was one of the chickens was positive and they're going to come and kill your chickens. Are they going to come in your house and kill your parrots too?
I have a feeling they would probably test first. Given that that one parrot in California was able to survive the virus with supportive care and was kept quarantined, they may allow that for a parrot, but I cannot speak for the state office. Each state office is run by its own veterinarian, and one state may pick something entirely different from what
Yeah.
somebody in the next state would.
I mean, the reason this comes up is because I think most of us are familiar with exotic Newcastle disease in California.
Yes.
And there are certainly stories going back of where the authorities were knocking on people's doors and do you have any birds inside? And the person that would have parrots and they coming in and just killing the birds. So we have Gail here from the Los Angeles area, and she can certainly speak to that.
Yeah, I can attest to that they would come in and just take your bird and kill it.
Yeah.
Although the last time we had Newcastle disease, which isn't that long ago, is we were told that you don't have to let them into your house, and they weren't just killing the birds right away, because there was so much blowback from when they were doing it the time before. So I don't know anybody that had their birds killed.
Yeah.
This last time, but I had written a story that one of our board members owns their own bird shop, and the health department showed up there and said they wanted to inspect her birds, and she said, "Well, I'm afraid you're going to infect my birds with Newcastle coming in, so you have to completely strip down naked if you're going to come in." They went away. They never inspected her birds. But yeah, that was really scary when they would just kill your bird without even testing before. That was like 2 times ago.
Yeah, it's scary because California tends to take a very aggressive tack to that because they do have a fairly large poultry industry, both egg and meat production.
Yes.
And they want to protect it at all costs. And sometimes, yeah, they might be overly aggressive and going after any bird in an area where there's an outbreak.
A lot of flocks of chickens were killed.
Yeah.
When we had the last Newcastle disease, the chlorhexidine solution is what we had what you guys use at the vets, what was recommended for sanitizing, and I happened to get it on Amazon.
Yeah, it's a good basic sanitizer. Now it is not one of the ones that's officially approved against influenza viruses.
It's not.
But I do like it for everything else.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, Pet Focus, which is what I use for sanitizing in general, Pet Focus is actually approved against pretty much all the viruses, including COVID, which came out. So, and Pet Focus is very non-toxic to birds. So it's certainly safe to sanitize. You don't have to, well, you can get it either already dilute or I have a jug that lasts for years that you dilute down, but I think that's one of the safest things you can actually use around your parrots.
And you can get that from Mango Products. I think that's their product.
Yeah, or any place you can get it on Amazon. So it is bacterial and virucidal. That's why I tend to like it. I just have to ask before we go back to the chat, the Red Lord parrot, that wasn't this time, right? Because that was H5N2?
This was a case report. It actually showed up at the UC Davis Teaching Hospital a few years before I got there.
Okay.
That particular bird came from a live market. So the Lord knows what else it was in contact with. And there was some suspicion, though it was never proven, that the bird may have been an illegal import from Mexico. Of course, they could never find the seller to track down exactly where it came from, but that happens a lot. The bird was purchased in Southern California, and there are a lot of legal and otherwise bird markets down there.
Right. All right. We have a bunch of questions in the chat, so let's go back there. Jeffrey says, how long does the virus stay infectious outside of a host? If I were to clean my tools, I like to isolate them for a while. What's a reasonable amount of time? And he also adds, excellent presentation, Dr. Sinclair. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm drawing a blank on the exact window where it's thought to be infectious. That said, Typically, if with people in influenza, if you were to walk into the room, a week after someone with influenza was in there, your odds of getting infected are probably pretty minimal at that point. Um, as long as you clean your tools first and leave them sitting out, you should be okay.
Yeah, I would certainly think if they're metal tools, once you clean them, they're going to be fine.
Yeah.
Influenza is actually, at least in humans, one of those viruses that stays contagious longer than a lot of others, unfortunately, which is why when there's a flu outbreak, there's a flu outbreak and everyone gets it. So it is one of those viruses that does stay active on inanimate objects for a long time.
Okay.
But as you mentioned, it's very easy to kill, and just soap and water will kill it. You don't have to get fancy with your disinfectants. Let's see, Teresa, with the chicken coop next door, it still makes me nervous as the entire back being exposed. Yeah, I would try to tarp as much of your aviary as possible.
Yeah, and if there's any concern, just keep everybody indoors. It sucks in this nice weather, but
yeah. Donna says having a biosecurity plan may help avert culling of a parrot if you have chickens, but each state makes their own determination. Yeah, since we do have people on here from many different states, I would encourage you to go to your individual state state website and read what they say, what plans they have in place, what kinds of things they do, because this is going to vary considerably from state to state. Connecticut and New York tend to be very similar with their plans just in general. Their Department of Environmental Protection is very similar, but I certainly can't speak to states and other locations.
Yeah, and even from vet to vet, I mean, Connecticut just changed state veterinarians within the past 2 years, and just moving from the previous person to this one, this new person does a lot more proactive about testing and reacts more quickly when there's a potential concern of an infectious disease outbreak. So it can be the difference between, Massachusetts taking a more lackadaisical approach because that's their person's preference versus Connecticut taking more proactive approach, or California, who takes a really aggressive approach.
To be honest, I didn't even know till this presentation that we had a state veterinarian. So, and I'm probably not the only one.
Yes, all 50 states, and I think even the territories and such do have a state veterinarian or a territorial Department of Agriculture. Even Puerto Rico even has its own separate Department of Agriculture to work with.
Wow. All right, Steve asked, what do you think about migrating hummingbirds? I've always had many visit me every year and love putting hummingbird feeders out around my deck. It's time to start putting their feeders out. Should I not this year? I actually just put my feeder up yesterday because hummingbirds are now a few cases in New England already. So
yeah, mine
so
went up.
I hope you're not going to tell me to take it down.
I hope not. I mean, yes, again, just like with the songbirds, there's been no reports so far, whether it just doesn't affect them or we're not looking hard enough for it. Hummingbird feeders, we should be cleaning those weekly anyway. So as long as you're keeping that thing sanitary, clean it. If you notice it's grossly contaminated, then I don't see any reason why you couldn't put out your hummingbird feeders like all the others.
Yeah, see, the deck's an interesting thing because when I go into the backyard to fill my feeders like I did today, I can leave extra shoes down in the garage, but the deck is right off of my bird room. I'm out on the deck all the time filling the hummingbird feeder, the bird bath, all those things. So it's difficult. I can't just leave the shoes outside in the rain. I can't put a foot bath out there because the outdoor birds will just try to bathe in it, and that's going to kill them all. So it's, I just try to come in quickly. I go to the sink, immediately wash the brushes I use for the bird bath, but there's no way to 100% keep the outdoors out of my bird room.
Yeah, and there's something to be said for the ugly old pair of Crocs. I mean, they are very sanitizable and cleanable.
True, or as Donna says, foot covers. I could just, go through 3 or 4 or 5 foot covers a day and just sort of them up. But like even the brush from the bird bath, it's going to have to go to the sink to be cleaned.
Yeah.
Let's see. Foot cover, purple martins to do anytime as well. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most. We just don't even know about the songbirds.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. But as if we see a mass die-off, but we know with most of the birds that we have found it in that they live with it. So they're not showing any signs. So if the songbirds
shedding.
are also living with it, we won't see a mass die-off.
And that is also something to consider with the wild die-off reports, is that these are birds where the carcass was tested for influenza and it came up positive. That does not necessarily mean that's what killed that bird. This is just purely testing results. Not all of these birds are going to have full autopsies done. They may find that, hey, this eagle actually died because it got shot with a lead pellet or it got hit by a car, and not that it had influenza. It just happened to be carrying the virus at the time it died.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've had that issue with the COVID reporting too, when people die in the hospital of, say, a heart attack. If they also have COVID, it gets listed as a COVID death. But
Yeah. COVID
but it's
kicked in the gear.
it's worse. Yeah, it's worse with the birds.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have any other questions? Oops, sorry, he's being a little chirpy now.
Can you give your website for your YouTube page? I just want to make sure that I can get the recording to my friends. Can you
Oh
put
yeah,
it in the chat?
absolutely.
Put it in
Yep.
the chat, maybe.
Yep. Hold on. Let me just go get it. And
Thank you.
and you know what? We'll, to the person who asked about Facebook, we'll post the video on Facebook. We haven't been doing
Okay.
that, and I don't know why, but we'll.
Yeah, I just
Pet
want to make sure
Focus.
my friends all see this. I have a lot of parrot friends, so. And I want to
yeah.
thank you, Dr. Sinclair. It was a great presentation. Thank you.
Pleasure. I'm glad you. Thanks for asking me.
All right. I'm gonna go get the link now. So talk.
Okay. Hi, it's Diane from Long Island. I have a morbid question. First of all, Dr. Sinclair, thank you so very, very much. We've all been, anxiously awaiting this Zoom. So thank you, Amy, for including us. My morbid question is, when they have to depopulate these thousands and thousands of birds, do you know how they do it? And what is the carcass management afterwards?
Well, the most common ways they do it, and these are things that have been approved for use, so they are not terribly pleasant, is they will use certain types of spray foams that basically suffocate the birds as they're buried in this foam. Sometimes they will turn off the ventilation systems. They'll basically just seal the doors and windows and turn off ventilation. And it's effectively a carbon dioxide asphyxiation. It happens in minutes, especially if they do it on a pig farm. But those are the two most common methods to depopulate a whole bunch of birds all at once. Obviously not pleasant, questionably humane, but it's over and done with quickly. Afterwards, they tend to dispose of them by often they'll do like a cremation, or I don't think they get sent to rendering plants, but they do tend to burn the carcasses. Smaller operations, they might be able to do a giant mass grave and bury everybody, but that's not feasible for like 1 million birds at a crack.
Thank you very much. I was just curious about that.
Yeah, it's one of the parts that nobody likes to talk about because it's just horrible to think about.
Right, yeah, but
I actually saw an article about it a couple of days ago. It was someone, they brought it up, the various ways to do it, because, even though the chickens are often not kept in great conditions in general, it really is, it's very emotionally horrific for the people who do have chicken and poultry farms. And they went through a number of ways, from bad to worse. And of course, the least expensive is the most horrific.
Yeah.
But there was this whole discussion about how you dispose of things. Apparently, you're not even allowed to burn the carcasses because of the avian flu. So there were only certain regulated ways that you're even allowed to get rid of the carcasses. For Roberta asked about Pet Focus. For some reason, I'm not seeing it on Amazon. So, which is obvious. I think that's where I usually buy it. But if you just Google, Gail has Mango, Chewy has it actually, and Mango Pet has it, and you can buy directly from Pet Focus. So you can just Google it. I recommend getting the concentrate, because the one bottle of concentrate will last you years because it's like one tiny little capsule in a bottle. But either way, it's really good stuff. And I did a head-to-head with Poop Off a number of years ago, and I found it actually cleaned better than Poop Off too. And Poop Off is not bactericidal and virucidal the way Pet Focus is. So, okay, let's see if there are any other questions. There are a lot of thank yous in here to you. This was a great talk. I mean, I sent you a list of questions and you addressed everything in there. And obviously, like most things, this is an evolving topic. So a month from now, we might know some other things. Just like early on with COVID, we kept learning as time went on. So we have to wait and see what's going on. But it's certainly a topic that is really important. Oh, and actually it reminds me, one other important question that affects most of us here. Is it safe to bring your parrots to a bird club meeting? Especially not knowing how the people bringing the birds might be housing the birds.
Yeah, that is a very good question. I mean, the big thing for me would be, where's my cord? Let me plug this in before it dies. Don't die on me, laptop. There we go. I mean, yes, it definitely would be a concern. We don't know, what's housing situations a lot of these birds are coming from, how well the biosecurity is handled at those places. I mean, in general, the risk of exposure from a parrot is very, very, very low. So at least we have that layer of comfort. A way of thinking of it is also that, we could say the same thing about anything like chlamydia. I cannot promise that any given bird showing at the bird club doesn't have chlamydia either. So it's the same kind of calculated risk as you would during any other circumstances, whether it be avian flu or chlamydia or beak and feather disease virus. Do we trust that every other bird at that gathering is safe? Well, that's a question only you can answer. If you're at all uncomfortable about the idea, then of course the bird should stay home. But at least with influenza, it seems like the risk of the parrot picking it up in general seems to be pretty low for the average bird, based on the fact that there's only been one definitively diagnosed parrot so far and a few others that have been found, carriers or infected, but it's overall pretty low risk.
If a parrot dies and goes for necropsy, like at Yukon, for example, are they going to test for it?
The poultry right now, absolutely. I don't know about parrots specifically. Certainly if they see signs on the necropsy that might fit, they might go for it, or you could specifically ask for it. But I don't know if they're including it with every parrot.
So like Diane is president of Long Island Parrot Society. Sharon's still here as president of CPS. I'm president of Parrot Club. The thing we're trying to struggle with is if we have an indoor event, do we just say no birds? If we have an outdoor event, if we have a picnic, do we say no birds?
I think with the picnic, I would probably say no birds, because your risk of exposure is going to be far greater outdoors than it would be indoors in terms of coming in contact with contaminated items. Indoors, I honestly is just as nervous with those in non-influenza times, because you don't know what else these birds could be carrying quietly.
That's always a problem when we bring our birds to the vet. Is you go in the waiting room of vet and you don't know what else is there.
Can't promise that parrot in the corner doesn't have chlamydia.
Exactly. Oh, and Gayla, who lives in California, where right now we don't think there's any avian flu yet, wants to know, what about taking a parrot outside for a walk?
Well, I think, as long as the bird is kept, on your person or in their little birdie backpack, odds of a bird coming up to you and being face to face with your bird are probably pretty slim. I mean, it happens every now and then that those of us who are outdoors somehow manage to get pooped on. It's not something that happens every time we go outdoors, but Lord knows it's happened to me at least twice when I've been out and running, that somebody has managed to dive bomb me effectively. So I can't promise it's not going to happen to your bird outside on a walk, but what are the odds?
They need a little birdie umbrella.
Yeah, seriously. Or even a little birdie backpack. I mean, that's at least reasonably enclosed.
Right, right. But you know, there are a lot of people that have the bird on a leash
Yeah.
and hold the leash. So I don't think I'd feel comfortable doing it here. I
Yeah.
think, you know, Gaylor's in California right now is safe, though that may not continue.
Right.
She says she doesn't walk under telephone lines. So yeah, that's probably good advice for all of us.
Sure.
All right, do we have any other questions? All right, well, if not, Kristin, I can't thank you enough for putting this together for us. I think this is just great information for us to have now. It's one, just like COVID a couple years ago, we were at a point with avian flu where most of us just aren't quite sure what we need to do. And I think you've covered a lot of that very well. So I want to thank you for taking the time to research this for us and present it. And we have a lot of thank yous in the chat. I want to thank everybody for coming today. And I will be sending out notices once I get it posted to YouTube. So I'll let everyone know. And if it will also be on our Facebook and you can access it through our webpage. So if for some reason you can't find the video and you want to see it, just contact us at our email. I think most of you have. And if you have any questions, I can pass them along to Dr. Sinclair. And please share this information. That's really important. Feel free to post the video everywhere, let everyone know. I think it's really important for anyone who has a bird to see this information and know about it. Oh, and Cornell says this is the best he's attended so far. Oh, lots coming in the chat, lots of great information here. So with that, I'm going to turn off the recording now.